So in Photoshop, we have a bunch of selection tools on the left-hand side of the screen. Each one does something a little bit different. And we're going to take a look at what they are and then think through and try and figure out what would be some good use cases for each of these different tools and how they work. When we look closely at a tool, we do notice that the tools, some of them have a little triangle in the right-hand corner. That indicates there are extra tools hidden there. So if I look at the rectangular marquee tool, if I click and hold down, we will see it gives me additional options. I have the elliptical marquee, single row marquee, single column marquee. So we have those options. If I look here, I have the Lasso, Polygon, and Magnetic Lasso tools. If I look here, I have the Quick Selection and the Magic Wand tool. So that's telling me I have quite a few ways to select the different pixels in my image. And these aren't the only ways I can make a selection. There are additional ones that we'll be looking at later on. But each one of these selection tools works best in certain situations, and there's not going to be you will only use one, but you will pick and choose which ones make sense based on what you are trying to do. If I look at the rectangular marquee, I can choose one of the others. You also notice we get M indicating which key to hit on the keyboard to choose it. So if I hit M, it gives me the marquee. And if I hit Shift M, it switches it to the elliptical marquee. Shift M again will bring me back to the rectangular. But I can't use a keyboard shortcut to get to the single pixel row or column selection. So when we see that option there and multiple options on a tool, if you hold down Shift and hit that letter, it cycles through those tools. So that's an important one to put into your memory with it. So if I draw with the rectangular marquee tool, I'm just going to zoom out, it allows me to make a selection on my image. If I switch to the elliptical, it allows me to make a selection that is oval or round in shape. Or the rectangular allows me rectangle or square in shape. So those serve a certain purpose. The single column, it just chooses a 1 pixel wide column of pixels. Row does the same thing, but it's on a row. Lasso creates a selection based on what I drag around. If I drag an arc and let go, you'll see that it closes the gap and it gives me that selection. The Polygon Lasso tool allows you to just click your way around a shape. It's not particularly forgiving if you're doing a complex shape. When you get to the end, the icon changes. So if we look at the icon, we can see it gets a little dot on it indicating it's going to close the circle or close the selection. If I click from here, it's waiting for me to keep going. But once I get there, click, and now it's made a selection. And these little moving lines, are moving ants, as Adobe likes to refer to them, indicate our selected area. So that is now the selected shape that we are looking at. The Magnetic Lasso tool requires an image with some contrast in it, so we're not going to look at it yet, as does Quick Selection and Magic Wand. Magic Wand, Quick Select, and the Magnetic Lasso tool are actually what would be referred to as color-based selection tools, which makes them different than pixel-based selection tools, which is the different marquee tools. And we'll see what that difference is in just a little bit. Right now I have a selection. It's a very ugly selection made with the Lasso tool. And with that, I also have the Pepsi logo on my clipboard. So I copied it from my web browser And now I could just choose paste, which I did that once before. I do it again, and now I just paste in that layer. But if we look under paste, we have an option of paste special. And we can also say paste into. And what we'll notice is it pasted it into that selection. So the logo has now gone into where that selection was. We can also try paste outside and see what that does. And we can see how it's now pasting it outside of that selection. But while it's doing that, if we look close, we will notice that the logo is pasted in its entirety, and it has a mask that's been applied to it. And that mask is controlling where it does and doesn't show up. It's the same kind of mask that we were working with when we were doing the image restoration. So it's a mask that currently is black and white, and I can now paint with more black and white to get the same effect. So if I go and grab a paintbrush and make my brush tip big and fat, now I can go across and paint, paint with black and white. When you are working with masks, it's really important to pay attention to, is my artwork selected or is the mask selected? And it's a somewhat subtle distinction when I'm in my layers palette over here. And when I look, I'll notice that we can see that the artwork is selected, not the mask. Mask selected, artwork selected. So if I undo that, select the mask area, and now when I paint, you can see how painting with white, switch over, paint with black, where the black is, that means it's not going to show where white is, it gets to show. So we're painting the mask the same way the mask worked with an adjustment layer. It also works with an artwork layer. But it's a really common thing that you go, oh, I'm going to paint on my mask, and your artwork is selected. And then you go, oops. But that's why your left hand is by the keyboard, and it can quickly hit undo, and then you're back in the game. So when something has been copied, and we'll talk about copy merged a little bit later on in class, we also have paste and paste special. And then when we're using paste special, paste in place comes into play when we've made a selection on our image itself. It's not as critical with what we're doing on this one. But paste into and outside, when we have a selection, paste into puts it in the selection, paste outside creates a mask so that the artwork shows outside that selection. So they can be real useful options to work with, so you don't have to paste something and then create a mask after the fact. If you know this is where you want it to go, it's a really easy way to work. Rectangular marquee, because it would make a selection like this, is not going to be a great one to cut this person out of the picture. It could be useful to trim it down, because if I make a selection, we'll see we have a select pull-down menu, and look at all of these other options under select. So these are all things you can do once you have made a selection. And one of the things that I can do that's pretty common is I inverse my selection. So currently he's selected. So if I hit delete, you see, oops, he went away. Again, undo is your friend. But under select, if I invert my selection, Command-Shift-I, now it inverts it. Now I hit delete, and it gets rid of the space around him. Now, once you have something selected, if you want it to not be selected anymore, it's Command-D on the keyboard. Command-A selects everything. Those are two that you should just memorize and know that those are ones that you are going to use. So that's really, these three of select all, deselect, and inverse your selection, three that are used very frequently when you are working with selections. So if I have a selection and want to now extract just him, or to work with my selection, a few things that we can do. With the Marquee tool, if I click and drag, hold down Shift, makes a square. So we have a bunch of modifier keys that we can work with. We have Shift, we have Option, we have Command Option. We'll be looking at all of those as we go through working with these selections. So then it's not working terribly well right there. Command D, undo it. But if I hold down the Option key, you'll notice it started drawing the box from where my mouse was. So to show that again, if I click and drag, it draws from the corner. If I hold down Option from that same point and click and drag, it starts drawing it centered on that point. So if I want to make a selection around his head, just a rough selection, and I'm going to switch to the Elliptical Marquee Tool. Again, click and drag. Oh, that circle's in the wrong spot. That's not where I want it to be. Oh no, woe is me. Oh, well, after I've made that selection, I can always move it. But sometimes, if I hold down Option, draws from the center. Hold down Shift, I get a circle. Now, if I hit the space bar while I'm doing this, I can actually move it around and then keep drawing it. So space bar, move it around. Shift keeps it circular. Option keeps it drawing from the middle. And when I press or release those keys, then we'll see let go of space, and now we're back to resizing it. So I haven't deselected and reselected, but I can now keep making that selection. With your mouse in the middle of the screen, Elliptical Marquee Tool active. If I click and drag, it draws a circle downward from that point. Command D, get rid of that. Go back to the beginning. If I hold down Option, click and drag, it starts drawing from that center point. And if I want it to become circular, I hit the Shift key. So now it's keeping the height and width proportionally the same. So I create that circle. And if I want to move this circle to the side of my screen, I hold down the space bar, and then I can slide that selection and then resume redrawing. At no point did I let go of Shift and Option while I was holding space bar. It requires a little bit of finger coordination to learn how to hit all of those keys at the same time. I like to use my left thumb on the space bar, and then I'm using my pinky finger on Shift my index finger in the space bar, thumb on Option, pinky finger on Shift is how I like to hit the keys, but you can figure out what works best with your fingers. So in the middle of the screen, if I start dragging but then hit Option, it's as if I started, it draws from the middle. I want it to be a circle. I hold down Shift and it constrains it to a circle. So I have my thumb on Option, my pinky finger on Shift, and then if I hit space bar, I can move this selection to a new location, let go of space bar while still holding Option and Shift, and then I can resume reshaping that selection. And the final trick is make sure you let go of the mouse button. If I let go of the keys, then it changes your selection. So let go of the mouse button first. And I will say that it's not uncommon when you're trying to do a complex selection, which is what we'll do in just a moment, to let go of the keys before the mouse, and then it ruins everything that you just did. That's normal. I'm going to draw one circle to try and build my triple circle selection. And I can drag from a corner, or I can hold down Option and then start dragging. Again, Shift so it becomes a circle. So that's now made one circle. I've let go of the mouse, I let go of my keys, hands off, I have a circle. But now if I want to add to this selection to create a triple circle, what I need to do is figure out how to do it. And Shift is really important here, because if I hold down the Shift key, we will see that my selection tool just got a little plus on it. Let go of Shift, push down Shift, it now gives me the plus. That's telling me it's going to make another circle. So now I'm going to hold down Shift and start dragging, but we'll see that it's not a circle. But I'm holding down Shift and it's not a circle. But now that I've started the second circle, if I let go of Shift and then hit Shift again, now it adds back in the constraint of making it a circle. Now, if I want the circle to be pretty close to the same size, I can try and eyeball it. I could make some guides ahead of time. But my circle's down low, and I wanted it in line with the other one. But if I remember that I used spacebar to slide my selection around, I can do the same thing again. I hold down the spacebar, so hitting the spacebar, and I'm moving this circle over till it lines up. And I'm hitting Option so it draws from the middle, so it's easier to even get it lined up in there. Now I'll let go of space, resize it, hit space, move it over a little bit, and okay, now that's pretty close. Now I still have Shift and Option down. I'll hit space, move it over. That gives me circle number 2. And then I let go of the mouse button before I let go of any keys, otherwise I have to redo everything, and that's annoying. So then I let go of the mouse, now I have circle number 2. And now we get to repeat that for circle number 3. So Shift to add to the selection, Option to draw from the center, let go of Shift, press it again, now it makes it circular, space to line it up on top of something so I can try and get the sizing correct, a little bigger, push space again, drag it over. I've now achieved the triple circle. Option, well, Shift added to something. So when I hold down Shift, we get the plus. If I hold down Option, we see we get a minus. So while I'm holding down Option, I like to do this with my thumb since I'm going to try to get a circle in the middle. And then I'm going to click and start dragging. Then I'll hit Option again. It shifts it back to drawing from the middle, but it still, as we can see, it's got the minus on it. And now I'll do Shift so it stays circular. And I got pretty close to where I wanted to be on that first go, so I'm just going to leave it. And I always let go of the mouse button first. Now go over to the next item, hold down Option, click and drag, Option again, now I'm in the middle, Shift to make it circle, and this time I'll hit space just to slide it over and down a little bit. Okay, mouse button first, again Option, click, start dragging, Option again, I'm back to the middle, Shift to make it circle, and then space to align it up so that it's centered. Let go of the mouse button first, now I have my 3 donuts. To verify it's working, I go back to my image, I hit the delete key, and we can see now it tracks donuts instead of circles this time. Pixel-based selection with the Marquee tools, with the Lasso tool, the Polygon Lasso tool, and they select areas of pixels that we define. That allows us to make things where we can make, the triple donut effect or something like that. And it's a useful way of making a selection in a non-continuous area. Because the basic selection, if I'm just using, that's a continuous area, but a non-continuous area, or if I want to add to it, Shift adds to it, hold down Option and start dragging. That takes away from it. So we can see how we can make complex selections. But these are all pixel-based. And they're what would be much more of a brute force method. That we use these when we're trying to just grab a chunk of something and move it somewhere else. So if I go over and say I want to go grab my guitar player here, then it would make sense to, if I wanted it quickly, I could use a rectangular marquee. That's fast. If I want it to be a little bit tighter, I could use the lasso, but you'll notice that's taking me a little bit more time to work my way around. Efficiencies. Made a selection. Now I can copy that. I can click over to a different document. I can paste that in, and we can now put it into said document. So that allows me to do gross or broad selections, but typically when we're trying to cut things apart or remove things from their backgrounds, we need more finesse or control with it. So when we are doing that, what we are going to be doing it. It's kind of fun having two people on screen at the same time. We can see different qualities of resolution. The model picture is much more high res. The guitar player not so much, but we're going to be able to at least see how some of this works. Now, it used to be we always, if we wanted to remove this background color, what I would do is I would use the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool looks for a continuous area of color or tone. It's actually looking more at the grayscale and the channels than it is at a particular color tone or color range. So if I click here, okay, it selects that. It selects, well, it's kind of working. We can see where it's kind of working, but not terribly well. So the Magic Wand it's an okay tool. And it used to be we would use the Magic Wand, we'd get close on something. And again, I can use the same trick I used with the Marquee tools. If I hold down Shift, I can now start adding to these selections and making more and more selected. And go, okay, that's pretty close. Looks decent. Now if I hit Delete, we can say, all right, whoa, we got a nice green cast. This is why using green screen images for still images when we're trying to cut things out, we always end up with that green glow afterward. It's a little bit hard to get rid of. The white glow is easier to feather out and make a little more transparent and work with it. So white backgrounds or gray backgrounds are usually considered easier to extract from than green. So we got the green here. It's not perfect. And just turn off the selection. We can zoom in and we can look at the pixels that are remaining. Now, way upon, time long ago, dinosaurs roamed the land and we had these tools that weren't as good to work with. What I would do is you would have to zoom all the way in, and then we would have to go through and individually delete the pixels from this. Delete the pixels from this, and what I would do is I would have to go, let's see, where is my tool that I want to work with? I can go use the eraser tool, and we would typically set the eraser not on brush, but on pencil, or even on block. So it's now grabbing one pixel at a time. And then I have to paint out each individual pixel. So you can see that this is a completely time inefficient way of working. It does not, it's slow, it's pathetic. If I catch you doing it, I will have words for you. And they won't be happy and encouraging words, except to find a better way to do it, because that's a horrible use of anybody's time. So we don't want to go that way. So using the eraser tool to clean it up, not recommended. When I do have selected here, it is possible that we can modify the selection to at least try to be a little bit better. And if we do that, we can go and decide, okay, well, let's expand it out. And we can decide that, because remember, this area, the emptiness around it is selected. So we're going to make it cut into the figure a little bit more. And I'll say, well, let's go in 2 pixels. Now we can see how it went in, but we'll notice it's going to get a haircut. So if I go, gets rid of more green, but it's also kind of slimming. Yeah, he's lost a little bit of weight here because we've really now trimmed up. So now I'll just pause while we go look for a background here. Looks like he's ready for the beach. So let's go for beach. There. And there. It's on the background. Pretty good, though. It looks like it's a little bit overzealous. I should have watched the edge before deleting because he lost a little bit at his neck. But it's quick, it's dirty, it gets it done very quickly. But if we step backward through the whole process, what we can do is, before we delete, before we get rid of anything on it, well, this is selected. Something else that we can do. You remember I promised we'd talk about layer masks a little bit more today. One thing about layer masks is we can add them. When we have a selection, if I hit the add layer mask icon, whoops. Okay, so now it made him go away. Whoops. Well, that's an easy fix though, because if I look at my mask over here, let's see, it's black and white. But I could invert it. We could switch the black with the white so that the mask behaves differently. And we can do that by simply using on the key command, Command I, it inverts it. And now we'll see he's cut out from his background. And we will go clean him up, give him his hair back on this side, fix up his neck here because the pixels weren't killed. Now if I go and paste in the beach, fill it up, accept that. Now if we go back over here and want to fix his chin, so we can see we shaved his head, cut into his chin there. Oh, poor guy. It's a mask. We can fix the mask. Brush is a little bit too big there. Shrink it back down. Zoom in more so you have a little more finessing control. And undo that. Flip-flop my colors. X on the keyboard transposes my foreground background. So if I look here, it tells me X. So if I click that button or use X, but now paint with white, we can see how I've now resurrected his chin. And if we want to give him some hair back, we can do that as well. Went a little bit too far, a few spots there, so hit X again, and then just start pushing the hair back so I don't see any of that white. And he's now on the beach with his chin and his hair returned to his body. Work with the layers. And working with layers in Photoshop, it's really important for you to come up with a system, come up with a way of using them consistently and regularly in your project. There's no reason not to use layers. Some people feel that if they have too many layers that they're doing something wrong. If you have 100 layers, you might realize there are some ways that you could simplify things or come up with a little better workflows. But that's not to say having a 100-layer image is bad. So if we have a bunch of layers in our project and want to work with it, we have a lot of options over in the layers palette that are worth looking at. So when I look at my layers over here, what I will see is when I have a given layer on screen, if I were to say grab the move tool, I could move him around. Ooh, he has no lower legs, that's right. So I can move him around within the picture to create a better composition or layout or design, or I may need to because I want to put some text on the other side of the photo. So I need to move him over. Look in the layers palette, we'll see there's an option for lock. And now if I hit lock all, if I try and move him, I can't because the layer's locked. If I try to paint on him, I can't because the layer's locked. If I try to do anything, I can't because the layer's locked. But I can also lock the transparency of a layer so it locks all the transparent pixels. So now if I try and paint, what I will see is nothing happens outside him. Oh, hang on. Sorry, there are no transparent pixels over there. I forgot on this image because it's masked, not cut. To demonstrate, I'm going to create a duplicate of this layer, and on this duplicate I am going to throw away the mask, and when it does that it asks me if I want to make that permanent. I'll say yes. So now he's effectively been cut out. I killed pixels. There's no masking going on. Now on this particular layer, if I paint, I can paint wherever I want. if I lock the transparency, it only is painting where there are existing pixels. So that can be a useful way of, you lock the transparency, so then when you're painting, it allows you to stay within the lines. So as a kid, if you had a coloring book and couldn't stay within the lines, this is a way to do it. I was the kid who couldn't stay in the lines. My best friend would color in the lines, and it drove me nuts. His drawings were perfect when he'd colored in, and mine were all over the page because I'm too impatient and exuberant to stay within the lines. We can lock it so we can't move it. So if I try and move a layer, it's locked. But if I try and paint on a layer, I can still paint. You can also lock the transformations of it. So we have different things we can, or we can lock everything. It's not a bad idea when you have a layer that is critical that you don't want to accidentally move, paint, or otherwise disturb. You lock it and you unlock it when you know you need to manipulate that particular layer. So locking and unlocking is a common practice or activity that you will want to get into. We also have within layers opacity and blending modes. The blending modes are crazy cool awesome because they allow us to control how the pixels in this layer blend with the layers underneath. So if I choose something like multiply, it takes and adds the two colors together. So we get some really cool effects. And then if we choose overlay, it blends them, but it doesn't make it go darker. Difference is a fun one because you get some interesting things when you put opposite colors on top of each other. If we look at the different blending modes here, a lot of them are variations of each other. So we have multiply, screen, and overlay, and then all of these other ones are different kind of combinations of those. But difference is really taking the color and flip-flopping colors as they blend together, and we can do some cool things with that. I'm going to look at some special effects that we can do and how that blending works in just a moment here. Sometimes exclusion can give you something so that color subtracts itself out, but there wasn't skin color in the sky, so we get to keep that, but there was some of the blue in his hair, so now that went away. So we're getting some really interesting blending effects occurring. So I have 3 layers, red, green, and blue. We're going to show how those colors all blend together. So if I take and multiply them together, we can start to see how the colors, when they overlap, they start to get some interesting effects. But now if we, oh, wrong, hang on. I lost them all. If I'm mixing together color, and we take red, green, and blue color and mix them all together, it gives us white. That's how your computer screen works. It has red, green, and blue LEDs in it that are able to then mix together to create white light. So we see when we take a red and a green and a blue color, mix it together in the middle, it then allows us to become white. So these different blending modes as we work with colors create different effects. So right now I have the color set to screen, but if I were to take the red and multiply it with the gray, we can see how the red suddenly became darker. So it's multiplying the color in. If we choose overlay, it doesn't multiply it, it just maintains its color relationship, and we see how the other two are behaving with it. Now if I go and change my green to overlay, we can see how we get a different color blending effect occurring. So as these colors show up, we get some really interesting possibilities as we combine layers together. So we can do some pretty amazing things. Now, what's really fun is we can even apply that to a tool such as the gradient tool. So if I look at the gradient tool, and I'll just choose red for my foreground color, green for my background color, and I'm just going to draw a line and see, okay, red to green. No big deal. But I changed the blend mode to difference. And we'll see where we start to get some cool psychedelic effects. Now if I were to choose two other colors, take pink and blue, well, notice how we were able to get some really interesting, almost psychedelic, space-like, colory textures. There we go. I like the pink and blue better than the kind of green and red. And so if you just keep grabbing a pair of colors that are somewhat opposite and start playing with difference, you get some really cool effects occurring. And these kind of weird space sci-fi texture sorts of things. So if you want to do space images and things, this can be a real handy technique for doing it. And it's because we're playing with a blend mode. Now if I take that and multiply that, we'll see how it affects images that are already there. And now your brain should start seeing some possibilities of how you could combine these different things together to create some really interesting results. But the takeaway is that the blend modes control how the colors in one layer blend with layers beneath. And it takes some practice to figure out which ones, and you just choose different things and decide what is going to work in your case. So if I change the blend mode on my model, difference is kind of fun, if I can actually choose it. So we get that effect. Now maybe that's too heavy-handed, and this is where, when I mentioned earlier, we may choose copies or duplicates of layers. So I have two copies of the same layer, and now this one I'll just leave as normal, put it underneath the other one, and whoa. But then you pull its opacity down, we can get some interesting or leave the difference on top and pull it down. So doing some experiments, doing some trials, playing with things, this is how we start to discover what is present in the program. It's not a matter of I follow step one and then I follow step two. Is you need to start getting a bigger picture understanding of, well, what are these different things doing as we work with it. Now, as you can see already, my layers are getting kind of messed up here. And it's hard to tell which one is which. If I double click in the text, I can now rename this layer. So I could call it guy difference. And now if I go into this layer here, and this is guy difference at 21%. So we can now start to choose different effects, choose different parts in our image. And if we label our layers, it's going to make it much easier when you get 50 or 100 layers. Like, much easier. My recommendation is every single layer in your layered file should be renamed. It shouldn't be layer 1, layer 2, copy of layer 2, copy 2 of layer 2, and things like that. But give them names to reflect what they are. Then when we look at your layers palette, we will have some idea of what's going on. And it's also, we're not left with a keep turning things on and off to figure out which one's doing which. So please, please, please start naming your layers. That's going to make everything much better for all of us as we keep moving forward. So name your layers as you are working, please. Text tool. So if we want to use the text tool, I click on the text tool. We'll notice on the control bar on the top, it gives me some options up there. Now if I click here and start typing, I will notice that my text is woefully too small for the size of my image. We do have to remember this was a super high-res image, so it's not really going to work well here, but we can make it work. So if I finish typing it in, I can click off it. We'll see the text is in my layers palette down here at the bottom. I'm going to pull it up to the top here so we can see that. It's up here, and it uses that. It shows me the text that's there. Now, if I click back on the text tool, we'll see those options come back up. Now, if I don't want to have to keep clicking on the text tool and selecting it, I can also go under Window and choose Character. And that will add both the character and the paragraph palettes over here. But the character one popping up, I can now type in a different size. So I can now make my text bigger if I want. I can also choose a different typeface. Because if I don't like Myriad Pro, we'll see that we have a lot of other options to choose from. So we can go choose something that's absolutely fantastic, like Papyrus or Comic Sans, or any other sort of font that makes people happy. I'm just going to choose Rosewood today because it's there. It's got some... No, actually, I don't want that for what we're doing next. I want something that's with flat letters. We want to do something to this. I said I don't care what color it is because down at the bottom in my layer palette, I will see that I have a bunch of different things here. Those options are layer effects, which are also layer styles. I mean, they used to call it layer effects, then they just said it's a layer style, but it says FX down at the bottom. So is it an effects or a style? You can do whatever, you know, it's in your brain. I always think of it as layer effects, even though it's called a layer style. My style palette up here is giving me a bunch of pre-built ones. If I click on that, we'll see that I now added a chrome look to my text without having to do any heavy lifting. And if I look in the layers palette, we'll see under the effects, wait, styles, effects, it's all the same thing. We have bevel and emboss, we have satin, gradient overlay, drop shadow, so it used those. It's like, Now I'm going to undo that. If I double click on a standard layer, it comes up with a window. That window shows me my blending options, and then it shows me what looks to be all of those same options that we see down here under our layer style effects. Or if I've applied something like Chrome, it puts some effects on. If I double click on effects, it pulls up this window, and I can now modify those effects. One of the cool things about layer styles, they can be saved and then used on different computers. So you can make a bunch of layer styles, and you can save them, share them on the internet. You can find layer styles that other people have designed, and they share with you to create certain special effects. So they're actually shareable, savable, and workable, and they're really cool. So we can see here's bevel and emboss. We can see now it's using that emboss feature. Now if I decide I want the emboss to be bigger, I can pull it up, and you can see it changing in my letters. And change, there's a little bit of light going on. It's not too much. Now if I look at a gradient overlay, you can see where it's using this gradient. If I click here, well, what if my gradient was that? What if my gradient is that? So it's the same thing. I've just now changed that setting. What if my, well, that's ugly. It kind of fits, though, the rest of the picture, so we're going to leave it for now. Because you can see it matches his color. I don't know if I want to go to this beach anymore. This looks a little disturbing. So we can now work with that. So now I've put the text in. I've put in a layer style. If I don't want any one of these parts in the style, I can just turn it off. So we can see we have the bevel and emboss, we have satin, we have drop shadow. Drop shadow is kind of fun because drop shadow, I can make it bigger, and then I can adjust its distance. See how you can move it over to get that effect? Drop shadows used to be so much work to do, and now you just hit the button, drop shadow, you're done. It's cheating. It's cheating. You kids are spoiled these days. I tell you. I'll just be the grumpy old man that, back in my day. Anyway. So drop shadow, we can modify the drop shadow that's at work there. I can go back, turn on the gradient if I want. So we have a lot of latitude when we work with layer styles. And because it's not a fixed permanent effect, we're able to modify it. And another thing that's really useful is layer styles, because they are settings and we're not actually changing pixels, we're just applying a modification to how the pixel shows up on screen, they are resolution independent. So if you make a layer style on a lower resolution image and then you decide, gee, I wish I could use that on my big image, you can just apply it to the big image and it will be perfect resolution there as well. So the layer styles are not tied to image resolution, which is super cool. Now that our computers are so powerful, it's not as big a deal. But it used to be you'd build your mockup on a low-res file because it took too long to do it in high resolution. And then you'd get client approval. And then you would transpose that layer style to the finished product at high resolution. But usually we can just work on the resolution of the file we need now. We don't have to have like a low and like a working res and then the finished res, which is it's a time saver. So layer styles are really beneficial. You can create all these cool effects and you'll want to work with them. But this also shows why I don't care what color mine is. Because now if I go into that, turn off gradient, and now I'll go here and just choose color overlay. Well, instead of gray, I'm going to make my letters red. I think pink's a little better. Pull it down a little bit so we can see the embossing. So I'm using a color overlay instead of a gradient overlay. Now these layer styles are not just tied to text, but if I go onto my person here, we'll notice we can apply it to him as well. So we'll see how the layer style is affecting that whole area where there are pixels. And just to prove to you how crazy that is, I'm going to use my paintbrush. And you can see as I paint, it already has the layer style attached to it, which I think that's kind of wow. Working in Illustrator, we will be using the text tool only. The rest of your artwork is set up. So if I want to change the date, I click, highlight, and now I could type October. If I want to change the year, perhaps you're sending a postcard from 1756. Because when I said you're doing a travel postcard, I did not say it has to be from this day and time. It can be from any date in history. So you can put whatever date you want on. You put in a zip code that corresponds to the location, and then you put in your city and state. If you branch out from the United States, you need to figure out how to represent that correctly on the postmark. But when I say you're doing a travel postcard, there's nowhere in the project brief that it specifies it must be from this contemporary time period. So you can choose any date and time and place in history. Be creative. Now if you double click on one, it brings you into that. Double click on the other. It's all with the text tool as we work with it. Downloaded the postmark file off of D2L. Inside Photoshop, we will choose place. we have two options. We can choose place linked and place embedded. Place embedded takes the contents of the file and puts it into the project. Place linked means you will keep this file with your project file, your Photoshop file. I'm going to encourage you to, for every project you work on, make a folder on your flash drive or hard drive or whatever you're storing on, and keep all of your image assets, keep your Photoshop file, keep this postmark file, everything's in that folder so you can find it. One nice place. But we'll choose embedded so it puts it into it. I'm going to go find it. Let's see, that'd be on the desktop. There's my postmark. And I choose place. So I chose file, place embedded. Now I'm putting it in. The default options are all we need, and then we'll be good to go. Now I hit OK. And you'll see that it comes in now. My image here, again, this is a monstrously huge image, so it's looking really small. But if I want it to get bigger, I start dragging from a corner, hold down Shift to keep it proportional. And I can put it in. And because it's a postcard that I could even put it on, crooked, that it looks like it got stamped onto the image. Once we get it where we want it, you click the check marker, hit OK. So I stuck the postmark in. I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to do it again. So File, Place Embedded. Go find the postmark AI file that was there. Choose Place, hit OK. Mine's coming up too small, so I'm going to scale it. Now, if I just drag it, that's not going to work. But if I hold down Shift, get a much better size, move it to about where I want it. I want it a little bit offset, so I'll rotate it by grabbing a corner. And now stick that on. And now accept the transformation with the check mark. Now it's been placed. Now that it's in here, we'll see that it doesn't really look like, it doesn't look good. Because, well, it's solid black with crisp, clean edges. It doesn't look like it was stamped onto the card. And that's something I want to see happen. So what I can do is everything that we just learned with layer blending modes and layer styles means that we can now transform this without changing any of the pixels in it. And we can do that. But first I do need to change the information on it. So if I double click on this thumbnail, so double clicking on the thumbnail right here, it gives me this. And it says, after editing the contents, choose File, Save to commit those changes. And then you will see those when you come back to Photoshop. Sweet. OK, we can do that. So I say OK. And comes here. Boom, there it is, wanting me to modify this. So now I am going to say that this happened over the summer. And June 13th, 2012. And our destination was, we will say this was, it doesn't look like a tropical, there's rocks and things in here. So I'm thinking that's, the big rocks off the shores in Oregon there. So I'm going with Portland, Oregon. OK, so I've made my changes, typed it in, and now Photoshop told me what to do. It said save. Can save that. Close this. Now if I go back to Photoshop, we'll see it now. It says Portland, Oregon, June 13th, 2012. So you don't need to know any Illustrator except choose the text tool and then click on the text you're changing and then hit save. So the heavy lifting's been done for you. Now that the text is here and we want to do something with it, one of the things that I could do to this text that I want to do to it is I want to do either a color or a gradient overlay. So if I do a color overlay, well, I don't want purple because that's not quite right, but I want to choose kind of a gray color. Because typically if it's been stamped on here, it's not going to be black. It'll be dark, but I want that gray even a little bit lighter because I want, well, that's here. I'm going to then multiply it in so it looks like the ink is now going to be blending in with what's happening. It should be. And we can pull our opacity down a little bit. Now, if I add in a layer mask to this, now I could paint with my brush. It goes away, and well, that doesn't look quite right, or that's really badly faded. But if I choose a brush that perhaps has some texture to it, so we can start to eat it up. Now I have to be careful with that. If I do too much, just hit X and then bring it back. Well, but when I hit X, what happens is look, my color's over here. I'm painting with black. Hit X, it's now to white. Bring it back. So now that starts to coarsen it up a little bit. So it adds a little bit of that texture, a little bit of that imperfection. Because that's one thing that when we're in Illustrator, it's perfect. All of those lines are perfect in their contours. But when we're in a photo, nothing has a perfect edge to it. So if we want it to then look a little bit gritty, a little bit textured, we can start to add some of this in to create that effect. Now I can go in and if I turn off the color overlay, you can see how that's really starting to affect what is happening with my color there. So we can place embedded, we can do a layer mask, we can do different layer effects or styles, layer blending mode, layer opacity. Combine all of that together, we're able to get some pretty rich effects. So when you go and create your postcard from your destination and date of choice, you get to figure out what it's going to be. Full project description under projects, travel postcard. There's the instructions. We may push the deadline back. That's 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks to work on it. If you show up with no work on the postcard by next class, it's due on the 21st. If everybody's making good progress, but it appears that we need more time, then I will push the deadline out. You see how that works? So if you blow it off for a week and do nothing, it's due on the 21st. But if you spend time and you come next week and we see that you've made progress, but not as much as you would like, then I'm very willing to push it out if we're going to get a better product. Make sense? Yeah. So if everybody shows up with nothing next week, it's due the week after that, no matter how much trouble you're having. And that will be a challenging week to make a good postcard. So we're making kind of our own variant of what you will read about in chapter 4. I thought it was, 4. 4 is the postcard, where they make the Hawaii postcard. So we've gone through a lot of that, but a little bit different. And you're going to then work on creating your own postcard. Now these are the specifications: size, resolution, color mode, required elements, at least 2 image assets, destination and tagline, and the postmark that identifies the location and date. Those are all required elements. You are going to be required to make a project folder, put your assets in it, put the PSD in it. You'll put the PNG, we'll talk about that next week. You'll zip all of that up, and you will be then submitting that to D2L. That is the part about adherence to specifications.
So by next week,
you need to be showing me progress.
So number of images, that will be my own image and the post stamp.
Yeah. So like me, if this was mine,
Yeah.
the beach and the guy, there's 2 images.
Okay.
and you put more, just
Oh, I said minimum 2.
Okay.
2 is the minimum. You can certainly put more. Good. So I want you to have some fun with this and make it creative. But also remember, you are in portfolio-based programs. That means you're trying to produce content to demonstrate to people that you can create quality products. This is certainly something that would qualify for that. So do well on it. So again, the project description's on D2L. So that's on D2L. The postmark is on D2L. Under handouts, there's the postmark. Here's today's notes that goes into what's been talked about to refresh you. I would say download those and then add to that everything that you can remember from class. I will be putting a link on D2L that will then bring you to my YouTube channel. So I will put a link to the video from today's class, but as you can see, there's a whole lot of videos up here. I don't remember how many. So it goes on for a while. So I'll share the link with you. You can go watch the video, use that as reference as well. I encourage you to do that. If you get stuck on doing anything that was talked about today and it's also talked about in your book, go watch the video and use the video as a way to refresh you and try and find what you've done.